heart of where innovation, money, and power collide in Silicon Valley and beyond. This is Bloomberg Technology with Caroline Hyde and Ed Ludlow.
I'm Caroline Hyde at Bloomberg's world headquarters in New York.
I'm Ed Ludlow in San Francisco. This is Bloomberg Technology.
Coming up, Apple gets slapped with a 1.8 billion euro fine by the EU. That's for abusing its dominant position in the distribution of music streaming apps. We'll bring you all the details.
Plus, AI startup Anthropic is launching new versions of its chatbot Claude that are twice as likely to answer a question correctly. We discussed the launch with Anthropic President Daniela Amodi.
And Amazon employees catch a glimpse into the future of work with humanoid robots as they enter their warehouses. We'll go behind the scenes for the look at Agility Robotics' two-legged bot named Digit. All that. So much more coming up. Let's get into these markets, though. And look, after 15 records on the S&P 500, we just give up some of our gains, and I shine a light on what's happening with the NASDAQ. We're only off by about 0.1%, but notably, we are just having a little bit of caution after we digest a lot of the market run-up that we've seen most broadly in AI stocks in particular. Golden Dragon Index, I want to shine a light on what's happening on Chinese stocks. Look, the NPC is upon us. We're still not perhaps going to get the articulation of a grand focus on growth and stimulation coming from China. And indeed, where is the press conference from the Premier? That's not going to be happening this time. Some anxiety around Chinese stocks, and we see that reflected in the US trading of those names. I'm looking at the 10-year yield just up 3 basis points. We look ahead to the jobs data that we get later in the week, a little bit more Fed speak, so all eyes on where we go in terms of the data. But we see bonds just trading a little bit lower. What is not trading lower, what continues to outperform, and of course thin liquidity on the weekend managed to continue into a drive up today on Monday trading 5.7% higher in good old Bitcoin. We are getting ever closer to that all-important record level that we had of 69,000. We're currently at 66.421. So keep an eye on that particular risk asset, Ed. What have you got on the micro?
Well, another name that's pushing higher is Nvidia. This is Nvidia's market cap, $2.13 trillion, the milestone that it reached Friday's close and into Monday's. It's now the world's third most valuable company by market cap on a dollar basis, jumping above Saudi Aramco. We'll continue to track that. Maybe we can discuss it a little later on the show. One other mega cap, the number 2 company in the world, Apple, is moving to the downside. The stock down 2.7%. That represents a drop of around $80 billion in market cap in this session alone. At one point, the stock down more than 3%, which would be a $100 billion market cap drop. This is not only the first EU antitrust fine that has been directed towards Apple, but I think it's significantly bigger than we thought it was going to be. 1.8 billion euros, $2 billion. And it's all about market abuse in a music streaming context that Apple plans to appeal. They're going to push back on this, and I think we brace ourselves, Caro, for a lot of litigation to come.
And of course, we know who delivers those fines, who continues to focus on big tech, is the EU competition chief, Margaret Vestager. Let's just hear what she had to say about it.
Today, the Commission has fined Apple 1.84 billion euros for abusing its dominant position on the market for the distribution of music streaming apps.
Let's get over to Brussels, where that news comes from. Bloomberg's Oliver Crook is with us. And Ollie, what's interesting is, yes, the money, but when you're looking at Apple in terms of hundreds of billions they've got in cash, the money doesn't always matter. It's a precedent, and it's also what changes in behavior that the EU is demanding, right?
Absolutely. I mean, this is a much larger fine, as Ed was outlining, than we had anticipated. I mean, the reporting on this was 500 million euros was expected. This is almost 4 times that, right? So there is a sort of a bit of a shock there, and it's all about abuse on the iOS, on the app, on what sort of apps and what kind of competition Apple was allowing to have from other people. And the EU has said, come out and said it plainly, how Apple acted was illegal. They've been doing it for 10 years, and they need to remedy this immediately. There is some doubt, perhaps, that this will be enough money to change behavior. However, again, it's coming in quite above what everybody had anticipated. And Apple saying that they're going to appeal it, that the regulators haven't proven, because this is a market that has still grown. But Vestager herself was saying that something like 20% of consumers who might have adopted Spotify did not get the chance to even see it. So this is really what's going into the crosshairs, into a week where there's a major piece of legislation on tech regulation coming out of Brussels.
We just showed Apple's response to the fine and the announcement. They gave a kind of pointed quote saying that in the context of competition, they feel that today's decision protects one clear European company, which is a market leader in music streaming. They didn't name them, but they're talking about Spotify. What is the debate here, Oliver? You have the EU saying one thing and Apple basically saying the opposite.
Yeah, well, Apple's saying, how can you say we've had such an effect on this when Spotify has done amazingly well, has done a huge amount of growth, and has not really suffered by, according to them. Of course, Spotify does not see things quite the same way, and Margaret Vestager had mentioned this in the press conference that she held earlier today, saying that basically you don't know how much more growth was available here potentially to Europe. So listen, you're going to hear this from Apple, you're going to hear this from the United States, but here in Europe, I mean, they really want to stake their claim on being the regulator. And it comes, again, the Digital Markets Act, which will come into force on Thursday. Think about it. We're talking about one company, the App Store, and dealing with music streaming. Starting this Thursday, you have major tech companies that are going to be touched by regulation that is trying to deal with all of this kind of competition in a major way. And that's not just in the App Store, and it's not just with these sort of apps. It is all encompassing. And they really want to set a strong message that you need to comply and that they are serious and that they are here for business. I mean, listen, when you look at this actual fine, 1.84 billion, right? They broke this down. When you look at the arithmetic, it's quite interesting. 1.84 billion. 1.8 of that is a lump sum that was put on top specifically because it was Apple. And why? Because it correlates to their annual revenue, 0.5%. So this is the EU saying that they're here and they're here for business.
All right, Bloomberg's Oliver Crook out in Brussels across one of the top stories. And tune in tomorrow when Oliver will sit down for an interview with EU Executive Vice President Margrethe Vestager. Coming up on this program, we're going to talk about Reddit's IPO, artificial intelligence, this collapse of Silicon Valley Bank, a big and broad conversation coming up with Citizens Financial Group Chair and CEO Bruce Van Saun. Caroline, I see some breaking news in the airlines.
Yeah, keep an eye on Boeing in particular. This is a big breakthrough for them. American Airlines is indeed going to be agreeing to buy 260 new short-haul aircraft from Boeing. That includes, 85 Boeing 737 MAX 10s. That's a key endorsement, therefore, for the plane maker after, we know, January's near catastrophic incident on the airborne Alaska Airlines flight, currently up 2.3% on American Airlines. Boeing still off by some 0.3%. So 85, we're going to be seeing Boeing MAX 10 aircraft and 85 A320neo planes from Airbus. So look, actually, there's still a 90 Embraer SAE 175 regional jets too. So American Airlines is spreading the love, but it is giving a 85 endorsement to Boeing MAX 10 aircraft. This is Bloomberg Technology. Cash flow management. It's not always the sexiest, but it's important, and actually AI has a role in terms of the solve here. JP Morgan's cash flow management tool that runs on artificial intelligence helps some of its corporate customers get this slash manual work by almost 90%. Since launching about a year ago, JP Morgan's wholesale payments unit now has about 2,500 clients using the product, and this follows other key banks, other lenders that have been stepping up their use of artificial intelligence with the aim of, guess what, lifting productivity, reducing costs, Ed.
One of those banks is Citizens. Let's talk more about that with Bruce Van Saun, Chair and CEO of Citizens Financial Group, who's in town for the Citizens JMP Tech Conference that kicks off today in San Francisco. So JP Morgan has this idea that they wanted to add $1 billion of value, and then they upgraded it to $1.5 billion this year because of the work they're doing in AI. Do you have a similar goal in-house that you're working on?
Well, maybe there's one less zero on some of these numbers,
sure.
Us versus them size-wise, but clearly we have a similar product called Cash Flow Essentials, which helps small business forecast their cash flows, and we're rolling that out this year, and we have great expectations for it.
You come to town 3 years after basically getting your tech vertical set up through JMP. Is there one clear ambition you have for this week that you think, in the conversations you'll have? And I know these kinds of events, there's a bit of deal making that goes on in the corridors as well.
Absolutely. So we have well over 100 companies presenting, both private companies and public companies. We have several hundred investors attending. So there's a lot of buzz about this conference. And I think it's staged at a very good time where the markets are starting to look more promising. We're seeing some green shoots around IPOs, which is terrific. And I think just looking at the U.S. economy and how tech is powering all industries and how AI has huge potential going forward, it's a really good time to have people get together and exchange their thoughts on that.
Let's jump in on the IPO situation then. Reddit is an important one for you. It's one that we're talking a lot about on the show at the moment. Just explain how that came about.
Well, I think we had a long relationship with them, and so we're going to be one of the co-managers on the transaction. And so they haven't filed yet, but I think there's a huge amount of interest. It's a great company.
Let's talk about whether or not that then spurs more green shoots, as you said. You can't have just one deal for green shoots in plural. Are we likely to see a reopening? Because at the end of 2023, look, Arm now really outperforming where it originally listed at, but Instacart queries over that one. Klaviyo has done well, but we all thought this was the reopening, and then it shut again.
Yeah, it's required some patience the last couple of years. So when we acquired JMP, it was the fourth quarter of 21, and the markets were red hot at that point. And so, as rates went up and the economy wobbled a little bit, I think that basically cut the interest a little bit in IPOs. But again, I think this year is the year when we're going to see a breakthrough.
Do the breakthroughs have to talk up artificial intelligence, the data that can be leaned on, for example, within Reddit, the areas of expertise that they're in different adjacent industry groups?
I think it can be broad. I think AI is certainly top of mind for the market, but there's plenty of great companies around security, different technology services that I think also are going to see a lot of growth. So that's what the market ultimately focuses on, is what's the growth trajectory. And so I think that extends beyond just AI.
And let's talk about your growth trajectory with Citizens Financial and ultimately how the market is supporting other regional lenders and banks such as yourself, because it is but a year almost ago that we were in the crux of the anxiety when it came to regional lenders here in the United States, the explosion of Silicon Valley Bank and ultimately some of the other spillover effects. You yourself managed to weather that storm, had different business models in place, but your share price is still under pressure and there's still anxiety around commercial real estate, for example, which we see front and center with New York Community Bank Corp. How are you seeing love, green shoots, appreciation of your business at the moment?
Yeah, so I think last year was a challenging year for sure with the idiosyncratic bank failures. Things have stabilized since then. Certainly the deposit position is very strong. We have a very strong capital position. So last year we spent a lot of time focused on defense and making sure our balance sheet was solid, put away plenty of reserves for areas like real estate, which we think those losses will be manageable for us. But, we always talk about you can't just win playing defense. You got to play offense as well. So we have some great initiatives. We have the Citizens Private Bank, where we lifted out a bunch of folks from J.P. Morgan. We're committed to this region here in Northern California. We have JMP, and now we came in over the top with the private bank, world-class, best-in-breed bankers. So we're connected to the whole innovation economy, the VC world, the PE world, all the folks who are creating lots of wealth here. So excited by that. We also have a big effort going on in New York, where we had acquired 2 bank franchises a couple years back, and we're making great inroads in that New York market. And then I would say the third thing that we're high on is just our ability to serve private capital around the country. So we've built out an M&A capability, sponsored coverage capability, and so we're really anticipating when private capital really kicks in. I think you'll start to see more deal flow in PE. Certainly our pipelines are looking very strong for the year.
The lesson that I learned out of what happened a year ago with Silicon Valley Bank is how concentrated the access to working capital was for technology companies, SMEs essentially. Yeah. What was your big takeaway? What was the one lesson or permanent change of the last 12 months resulting from that saga?
Well, I think people were a bit envious about how Silicon Valley Bank had locked in a lot of that customer base, and First Republic also. So now the demise of both of those banks creates a real opportunity for folks. There's a void there, and so it's all about talent, and it's about commitment. It's about strength of offerings and capabilities, and so we're marching right in to help fill that void.
And you're going to be hearing from some of those businesses, those sectors you're shining a light on at your event this week. We thank you so much, Bruce Van Saun, Chair, CEO, Citizens Financial Group. Let's just return to look at the Elon Musk lawsuit against OpenAI filed last week, alleging the company violated its founding mission, putting profit ahead of benefiting humanity. VC community weighing in, Andreessen, and of course Vinod Khosla that we saw over the weekend. But let's get a legal perspective for you. Christina Garnier is with us, technology lawyer over at Jeffer Mangels, Butler & Mitchell, whose practice focuses on technology transactions, on intellectual property, and a whole raft of areas that have caught the technology sphere and its focus. But Christina, is this some sort of distraction, as a Vinod Khosla would say at the moment, these sorts of legal implications for OpenAI, or will they force some sort of transparency as to whether or not artificial intelligence should be being grown in a closed environment or indeed an open one?
So I think the complaint is really interesting because it really is setting out this framing of, OpenAI was open source and it was nonprofit. And so, that was sort of this thing that helped it to grow and to thrive. And, this is not happening in a vacuum. There's a lot of history between the parties. But this is really about, open source and nonprofit. And you see across the technology space over the years, a lot of very interesting technologies came from the nonprofit space and remained open source. And the value of that has been that if there are issues with the technology and there's things that need to be fixed, you have researchers, academics, and technologists who have access to it. And so, this idea that now it is for-profit and commercialized and sort of deviated from the original mission of what OpenAI was supposed to be, presents some really interesting issues. And, again, this isn't happening in a vacuum. So, there are regulators across the globe who are looking at AI technologies right now. So this, the themes of this lawsuit sort of feed into that concern about the stewardship of the technology. So one of the interesting things in the complaint is that, the board itself of OpenAI started out as this depth of knowledge of AI technologies. And one of the allegations in the complaint is that the new board doesn't have that depth of knowledge. And so there's this larger stewardship question. I think that, the general consumer public, AI is still very new.
Right.
I think that many people, ChatGPT is their, touch
Christina,
point with.
Let's just hit the brakes a second. You are an experienced technology lawyer, but for loads of people, I don't think anyone really understands the root of Musk as the plaintiff's complaint here. So he's saying it started as a non-profit for the betterment of humanity, and now he's saying that's not the case. But what legal grounds does Musk have, if any, to make that complaint, and what is it that he's trying to change?
So he's bringing a breach of contract claim. That's basically the basis of the lawsuit. I don't know what grounds there necessarily are. The complaint is really around this framing that the articles of incorporation, as well as communications over the years, form the basis of a founding agreement, and that there's been a violation of that agreement. But, this was just filed last Thursday. I think there are some issues as to whether or not there is standing in the case. And so that'll be something that will remain to be seen as the case progresses. The other thing that, this case could also be, this lawsuit filing could be, is a device to get information. Again, the parties have a long history, and if the case were to move forward and survive a motion to dismiss, for example, discovery could, give the parties access to information they normally wouldn't have. So I think it remains to be seen if this suit really is a betterment of humanity, open source lawsuit for the good of AI and for the stewardship of AI, or whether or not, this was a device to get information. So, we'll see what happens over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah. Have we ever seen, or have you ever acted on legal arguments that take issue with the fact that ultimately a company completely pivoted, and whether or not it's a pivot of business model application or whether it's that you were not for profit and then you became for profit? Have we got any precedents for that sort of thing?
There's not a lot of precedence in the space. Many technologies that started as nonprofit do remain so, but I think part of this is transparency. I think that, throughout the complaint, there's reference to just the transparency in the process, the transparency in the transition between this nonprofit open source model and what we're finding today. So a lot of this comes back to things that, have been well tread ground over the last, year or so in terms of just the transparency at OpenAI and the communications coming out of the company. But again, I think that, this does bring up some really interesting and timely themes around stewardship of AI generally.
Christina Gagne, partner at Jeffer, Mangles, Butler & Mitchell, we're really grateful for your expertise, and we will continue to track that case and suit. Let's get back to Reddit's IPO. The company is seeking a $6.5 billion valuation. That's according to Bloomberg sources. I want to bring in Bloomberg's Katie Roof on the deals team. We're kind of jumping around a bit here, right? The last private round, $10 billion. Then the reporting was the IPO might target $5 billion. We're kind of up to $6.5 billion. What else do we know?
Sure. And so, this happens because it can be hard to guess exactly where the market is going to be when Reddit debuts, likely later this month. But yes, so they were valued about $10 billion in 2021, but that was also the peak of the private tech market. And so, many companies are expecting that they will be valued less when they go public. Yes, we had heard, early talks had them valued around $5 billion, but it's now looking like ahead of the roadshow. Bankers think they can get $6.5 billion for it, but sometimes these things, raise or even lower during the roadshow, depending on how demand looks from the institutional investors.
And is it institutional investors that are going to be the mainstay for a name like Reddit? A lot of this is going to be trading on, the exuberance from retail too. I mean, it's a key retail name in so many ways.
Sure, I'm sure Reddit would love to have both kinds of investors, but bankers really target these large institutional investors to try to hold the stock because they need large anchors that they can trust will, keep the stock for a while. So during this roadshow, they're going to, market Reddit to these investors, try to get a sense of how much demand is there, and then set the price accordingly.
We keep an eye on all those discussions on price points. Katie Roof, we thank you for keeping us up to speed on it.
Welcome back to Bloomberg Technology. Ed Ludlow here in San Francisco.
I'm Caroline Hyde in New York. Let's get your check on these markets because a little bit of give in the overall perspective of NASDAQ and the S&P 500. We'd had, 15 record highs for the S&P 500. We're just taking a little bit of money off with a little bit of calmness ahead of the jobs data later this week. And of course, we continue to build the narrative coming from the Federal Reserve. NASDAQ 100 off by 0.2%, let's call it. S&P 500 down about 0.1%. As I say, 15 record highs had been hit. I'm looking at Bitcoin, though. No give up there in that particular run up in the asset type. We're up 5.7%, $66,000 handle. We continue to push towards that all-time high of 69,000 hit all the way back in November 2021. Move on and have a look at some of the individual movers that we're keeping an eye on because Apple is down 2.7%. But this is a big hit, of course, to the overall benchmarks. It's still one of the Magnificent Seven, and we have seen Apple giving away significant amount of market value since, really the start of the year. We're questioning, of course, some of the sales that are going on at the moment, and of course, we continue to see some of the overall downward trajectory of Apple and how it's really split apart from the S&P 500 and some of the weakness that we see from China. Let's look at the weakness that we see from China when it comes to Tesla as well. That's been some of the narrative today. We're off by 6%, one of the key movers in terms of points on the NASDAQ overall as we think about what the supply chain over there and indeed demand. I'm looking at what's happening, though, on some of that higher side. This is a company that is finally, because of its rampant growth, the AI bullishness has been entered into the S&P 500 index. We're up 24% on the day. We know it is a hugely volatile name, but keep an eye on Supo Microcomputer. Ed, what have you got?
Let's talk a little bit more about AI. Anthropic today debuting 3 new AI models from its Claude 3 model family, Haiku, Sonnet, and Opus, all offering increasingly powerful performance, allowing users to select the optimal balance of intelligence, speed, and cost for their specific application. I'm delighted to say that Daniela Amodei, president and co-founder of Anthropic, here on set in San Francisco. You're saying these models are twice as likely to answer a question correctly What do we mean by that?
So first of all, Ed, thank you so much for having me on the program today. We are very excited to be announcing this new model family of Claude 3. And really when you say, twice as likely to answer, correctly, what that means is how high or how likely is it that one of these models will sort of make something up? And so in addition to making these kind of intelligence advances really across all three models, we've also been working on many of the common challenges that businesses and in particular enterprises face when integrating generative AI into their businesses and workflows.
One computer scientist reached out to me and said, I've never used Claude, but I'm impressed by the testing scores, but also impressed by the fact that it's available straight away. And I also note that Amazon AWS came out very quick to say, go to Bedrock, you can use it right now. Bedrock's been a real success for you guys in commercializing the underlying models. Just explain the rollout and how you're able to do this immediately.
So what's being offered today, so you mentioned those three models in the family. So Claude 3 Opus is really our most powerful state-of-the-art model. Claude 3 Sonnet is that middle model that is still incredibly capable and quite price competitive, particularly for its intelligence class, and very fast. And then Claude 3 Haiku is the kind of fastest model, really, really great for sort of any type of use case that requires a quick response. And so today, what's available in our API is Claude Opus and Claude Sonnet, so the bigger two models. Claude 3 Haiku will be rolled out in the coming weeks. And then on AWS Bedrock, you can access Claude Sonnet, that middle model today. And also on GCP Vertex in private preview, you can also access Claude Sonnet. And I'd be remiss to not mention Claude AI, our consumer product. You can access Claude Sonnet for free, and Claude Opus is available for our pro users as well.
But Daniela, what's been interesting about the focus that you've had at Anthropic is on the commercial use, is on the business case use. And I'm interested, Opus is relatively expensive compared to some of the competitors out there. What your client base drawn to? Is it still the focus on safety, which was first and foremost, or what else are you winning them on over the competition?
So really the kind of reasoning behind why we did this model family was we wanted to give enterprise businesses as much choice as possible to really be able to toggle between what is the most important kind of element for their business, or even in particular for their use cases. We anticipate some of our customers may use multiple models just for different applications. So Claude 3 Opus is really a great choice if you need the kind of most powerful state-of-the-art model for very complex reasoning. And I also, should say, so much of our enterprise kind of strategy has been around building these models and making them increasingly more intelligent and fast, but really also ensuring that throughout we are prioritizing reliability and trustworthiness. So many of the businesses that we build on, that build on Claude, really require a deep amount of trust with the customers that they're ultimately building for. And that's really been kind of a guiding factor for us as we have been training these models for our customers.
And that goes straight to the heart of some of the difficulties that have consumed your competitors and just general adoption of AI within the landscape from a regulatory perspective and a consumer use point. I think of, the image generation part of the equation right now. We all look to what's happening with Gemini and the fact that they tried to alleviate the bias issues and in so doing ended up with ahistorical images. Talk us through some of the ways in which you get over the hurdles of trying to put safety first, of trying to put bias first, but trying to get these ultimately incredibly powerful models into people's hands quickly.
So one of the things that we have always really focused on from day one is this question around safety and trustworthiness and reliability. And while it's the case that no model available on the market today is perfect, Anthropic has always really aimed to be the industry leader when it comes to safety. We use a technique called constitutional AI, which helps to provide all of our models, including the Claude 3 model family, with this sort of constitution for how to approach, challenging questions, right? Introducing a sort of layer of nuance into how the models might respond to difficult prompts.
Daniela, you and many of your co-founders at Anthropic previously worked at OpenAI. Elon Musk has sued OpenAI and is saying basically they're breaching their original contracts because they are no longer a not-for-profit and they are not following that original mission of benefiting humanity through their work. Your reaction to that, given your history at OpenAI, but also the work you're doing now at Anthropic, which has a similar not-for-profit setup?
So something that we've always aimed to do as a public benefit corporation at Anthropic is really, balance the kind of incredible potential power of these technologies while still ensuring that what we're developing is reliable and safe. And really our kind of founding vision, right, our founding mission for the company was let's work to really raise the watermark in the industry of AI and ensure that whenever we put a model on the market, Anthropic wants to feel very confident that it is as safe as it can be. And I think what has been so exciting, about this model release is really raising that watermark, not just on safety, but also on intelligence and capability simultaneously. And I think that guiding light has always been an incredibly sort of important founding principle for us.
Caroline mentioned it, and you and I have talked about it, that you're pursuing a focus on enterprise customers, the SaaS cloud companies, but you still have this public benefit corp center. Just explain how you manage both of those goals.
So something that I think is really interesting that we've seen with so many of the enterprise businesses that are really building on top of Claude is that this approach to building systems that are safe and kind of built on trust and are secure and are reliable is actually a huge draw for them, right? So many of the Fortune 500 are driven really by trust with their consumers, right? And so I think something we take incredibly seriously is this belief that when we are helping to empower businesses to build on Claude, that what we're putting in front of them is safe. And I think that's perfectly in line with our public benefit mission.
Are you ultimately improving people's lives? Do you still feel, Daniela, you as a company, but as an industry more broadly?
So something we've been really kind of excited and inspired to see are just the incredible potential and kind of use cases that our customers are using while interacting with Claude. So this ranges from things like, financial services, businesses like, Bridgewater and SAP, SK Telecom, really just transforming how they work and how they interact with their end customers. But, most recently, I think I've been incredibly excited to see so many, education, healthcare, and nonprofit businesses as well really start to take on kind of the mantle of generative AI. We've been very excited that groups like, the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute are building on Claude.
So too is Asana, Airtable, Bridgewater, some really notable names in the finance space and in productivity space. And I'm interested that at the time that clearly from an enterprise perspective, everyone's rushing to get in, and clearly productivity can go up and to the right to a significant amount. But we do question perhaps some worries around jobs, but we also question ultimately OpenAI versus closed AI. And we go back a little bit to the drama that's unfolding between Elon Musk and OpenAI, and I know you must be relatively exhausted by that. But I look at what Vinod Khosla, for example, has been tweeting about, saying that ultimately Sam, Greg, and the team over at OpenAI have been pushing out faster, better products, and they need to be in a more closed space. OpenAI and ultimately artificial intelligence innovation shouldn't be done permanently in some sort of open test way and means of doing it. Do you agree? What is your ethos on open versus closed, Daniela?
I think really bottom line is that there's so much space in the kind of generative AI industry, right? There are many different types of models that are being rolled out across really a variety of different services. And my sense is that as businesses, really are becoming quite sophisticated with how they integrate these generative AI technologies, I expect that what we'll see is really a kind of multi-model approach, that many businesses might choose to rely on one type of model for certain use cases and other types of models for others. So I feel there's really quite a lot of sort of space and territory for all of these different players to kind of operate in the space.
And your space and your territory being guarded by the fact you've got these 3 new models open today. We thank you so much for talking us through some of the innovations that you're bringing in Anthropic. Daniela Amode, she's president and co-founder of Anthropic. Ed, what have we got coming up?
We'll get back to Bitcoin and Bitcoin's rally up next, and whether concerns of a plunge following a surge might be justified. Still, Mark's Elise Killeen joins us on the program. We'll be right back. This is Bloomberg Technology. It's time for Talking Tech. First up, cyber attackers backed by North Korea are said to have infiltrated two South Korean semiconductor equipment firms late last year. That's according to South Korea's Seoul spy agency. The agency is advising companies to take precautions after detecting attacks in December and February in which hackers stole product and manufacturing blueprints. And shares of C are giving up gains after the company reported a smaller than expected drop in earnings. Southeast Asia's largest internet firm rallied as much as 19% in pre-market trading. The company says it sees improving prospects for its e-commerce and gaming business, alleviating some concerns of slowdown in its online retail arm, Shopee. Plus, SpaceX and NASA saw a successful launch of Russian and American astronauts headed to the International Space Station, where the four-person crew is expected to spend 6 months. The mission, dubbed Crew 8, marks the 13th assignment for SpaceX, carrying a live crew, and the 8th operation for NASA with a commercial crew to the ISS. Caroline.
Other things, maybe going to the moon in certain spaces. Let's talk about it with VC Spotlight moment. Get back to Bitcoin and discuss the run that we've seen across crypto more broadly. Can we, of course, be questioning some of the parabolic run that we've had? Is it valid, and is there leverage behind it too? I'm pleased to welcome a long-term player in the space, Stillmark founder and managing partner, Elise Killeen, who really has been thinking about the ways in which to scale and to make more efficient the space of Bitcoin and layer 2s within that. But Elise, more broadly, when you're looking at the run-up in a price point, you must be exhausted by the fact that everyone looks at this basically as sort of an asset to be, well, betting on and exchanging hands. But does it make sense to you? Are you worried about any leverage, any volatility?
So the price appreciation, of course, is going to draw attention. What we're seeing now is an expansion of Bitcoin's user base through the introduction of a spot ETF and a directly regulated way for new entrants to hold Bitcoin asset. I believe that this gives first-time access to many, and especially to the boomer generation. If ahead of the ETF launching, we could have projected between 80 million and 130 million Bitcoin holders, we have to acknowledge that most of those were Gen Z or millennials. And so with the spot ETF, we see a new population onboarding to Bitcoin. And Bitcoin's price has always been driven by adoption and expansion of use case.
I really appreciate focusing on kind of the structural and long-term elements that are happening here, but I want to just go a little short-term real quick. I always find it so interesting about the 24/7 trading patterns of crypto, right? And when we left the show Friday, we were talking about similar themes, but there's a lot of liquidity, a lot of trading that goes on over the weekend, some of that in the Asia session. I just wonder if you look at that and see any concentration of activity by geography, if it's happening in North America or it's happening in different parts of the world.
So Bitcoin is, of course, a 24/7 market. The introduction of the ETF has allowed a bit of a break to the attention that's needed to be paid to weekends and after hours, and that much of the movement in Bitcoin has been generated by excitement and flows in the ETF products. Now, all of that said, of course, our attention is more on the long-term Bitcoin trends, including price trends. And while we could expect to see some periods of consolidation along the way, I expect we end the year significantly higher than we're at now.
Going back to the underlying innovation that therefore now gets us from not only seeing Bitcoin as an asset class that has far more in demand and across different stereotypes of people, but I'm also interested in what therefore is made of the asset itself. Much of the issue is ultimately it's the gold, because we're not going to do much more in terms of actual use cases and smart contracts because it was expensive and difficult to scale. But you're solving that problem with some of the companies you invest in. What have the ETFs, for example, brought to bear in terms of innovation?
So this is really interesting. We work with founders that are attempting to solve the problem of both pathways to adoption, as well as expansion of Bitcoin use cases. Much of that is happening with Bitcoin, the asset, on Bitcoin's core protocol, but we're also seeing a flourishment of development and developer activity even in Bitcoin layer 2s. It's notable that the 24-month growth of Lightning Network, for example, which is Bitcoin's primary payment technology, was over 1,200% between the period of 2021 and 2023, giving us a sort of base of monthly transaction volume of over 7 million transactions. Now, there's tailwinds to adoption for Lightning Network by the introduction of new Lightning Network-related protocols by Stillmark portfolio company Lightning Labs. And by that, I mean that we expect to see the migration of stablecoins from an altcoin environment, Ethereum or Tron, to Bitcoin via Lightning Protocol Taproot assets, which will allow other digital assets to trade on Lightning Network in a more efficient and economical way. And then on top of that, Lightning Network offers the benefit of being more scalable in terms of transaction throughput, because you can expand transaction volume without needing to commit those transactions back to a base blockchain and take up block space. We're also seeing the introduction of protocols that enable Bitcoin to be used as a suitable payment for the AI space and for payments for API calls. And what that means is that we can start to really use Bitcoin to unlock some of the native value of the web and internet broadly.
All right, Stillmark founder, managing partner Elise Killeen, as Bitcoin trades $66,500 per token.
Employees over at an Amazon warehouse near Seattle recently got a glimpse of the future of work, and it's very sci-fi. A 5'9" robot that looks like a human, walks like a bird, and has glowing white eyes. Let's bring in Bloomberg's Matt Day, who got to meet Digit, or the Digits, and at the moment they're doing pretty menial tasks, ferrying boxes, empty ones, backwards and forwards. But, I mean, are we at the cusp of some breakthrough? What got us here? Why does it feel so sci-fi?
Yeah, it really feels like we are. I think a lot of it is just sort of the consumer electronics revolution, broadly speaking. Motors are cheaper, little actuators that make these guys move and able to bend and flex. Battery technology has gotten a lot better. And then recently you layer AI on the top of it, right? These robots don't really make a lot of sense if you have to have somebody piloting the controls, but if you can do it sort of systematically and have them kind of reason their way through the world, then maybe this all starts to work.
There's a lot happening in robotics, right? Think about Figure AI, think about what Tesla is doing with Optimus. But it's not sort of real-world deployment. What is Amazon's plan to make this commonplace?
So Amazon hasn't told us a whole lot about their roadmap, but what we know now is that they are testing these robots, like you said, to move totes in their warehouses. There are a lot of spots in Amazon's facilities which are already highly automated that still require, flesh and blood, somebody picking up boxes, moving boxes to a conveyor belt from a pallet. That work is pretty dangerous. A lot of people don't want to do that work anyway because of relatively low pay and kind of hard pace of work issues. So they're pitching, or at least Agility Robotics is, that they might have a solution to this in the form of Digit, their little white-eyed robot.
Go read your piece in Business Week, go and see the pictures. It looks like they're doing push-ups in one particular piece, but apparently they're hibernating. Matt Day, we thank you. That does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology.
Check out the pod, dear viewer, dear audience member, wherever you get your podcasts from San Francisco and New York City. This is Bloomberg.